The conference room was buzzing with chatter as Rick clicked through his slides. A chart about value optimization glowed on the screen behind him, generic, polished, and utterly unconvincing. He turned to the audience with that practiced Harvard MBA smile. "Absolutely," he said, nodding as if he had just dropped the inside of the decade. I sat at the back, watching. My chest tightened when he casually mentioned, "In fact, I have family connections that give me unique insight into the inventor mindset." "Family connections?" asked a client from Raytheon, leaning forward. Rick glanced at me, then back at the room. "Yes, my father has worked in aerospace manufacturing for over 30 years. He's provided perspective on how blue-collar innovators approach intellectual property." "Blue-collar innovators," I muttered under my breath. Margaret, sitting near the front, perked up. "What kind of manufacturing?" she asked. "Mostly component development, bearing systems, primarily at Boeing." The room seemed to lean in collectively. "Boeing's bearing technology has been a leader for decades. Sophisticated engineering." Rick nodded eagerly. "Exactly. But many of these innovators don't fully understand the commercial applications of their work." A man in a Navy suit raised his hand. "Rick, when you say family connections, do you mean general industry insight or specific patents?" This was the moment Rick could have taken a step back. He could have generalized, kept the stories safe, but his ego, sharpened by years at Harvard, took over. "Specific patent knowledge," he said confidently. "My father's work has led to several innovations that generate significant licensing revenue." The room fell silent. Margaret was scribbling notes. The Navy man typed rapidly on his laptop. "Could you be more specific?" Margaret asked. Rick looked at me, calculating. Backing down wasn't an option. He had to double down. "Bearing system optimization, turbine efficiency improvements, technologies that have saved Boeing millions in operational costs." "Impressive," the Navy suit said. "Mind if I ask your father's name?" Rick froze. Then, barely audibly, "Frank Miller." The man's eyebrows shot up. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Phones appeared. People were typing furiously. Margaret stared at me with curiosity. "Mr. Miller, would you mind joining us up here?" I rose slowly, letting the tension build. Rick's face turned pale. The PowerPoint behind him, still touting strategic approaches for blue-collar innovators, now felt like a relic from another world. As I stepped to the front, the room held its breath. The room was quiet, every eye on me. Rick's confident facade had crumbled. Margaret Wheeler and the Raytheon client were fully attentive now, and I could feel the weight of 30 pairs of senior executive eyes on us. "Mr. Miller," Margaret began, her pen flying across her notebook, "your work on bearing efficiency and turbine optimization has been revolutionary. Patent 5923891 alone reshaped the industry standards." I nodded simply. "Thank you." "And patent 645723, the turbine enhancement system, generated over $30 million in licensing revenue?" Margaret continued. "Closer to $40 million, I corrected, but who's counting?" The room went silent. Rick's face had turned a shade of pale I didn't think humanly possible. Margaret looked between Rick and me, her expression one of sharp realization. "Rick," she said carefully, "when you spoke about blue-collar inventors not understanding the value of their intellectual property, you were referring to your father?" Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He couldn't speak, couldn't deny it. Margaret continued, her tone calm but pointed. "Frank Miller is one of the most respected patent holders in aerospace. His licensing agreements are considered the gold standard for inventor compensation." A woman from Lockheed raised her hand. "Mr. Miller, we've been trying to reach you for months about consulting. Your efficiency innovations could save us millions." Another executive chimed in. "Sir, our firm would be very interested in representing your upcoming patent applications." I raised my hand to stop the cascade of questions. "I appreciate the interest," I said, "but I'm mostly retired these days." Rick finally found his voice. "Dad, why didn't you tell me any of this?" 30 senior executives turned toward him. His son, who had been confidently lecturing about undervalued inventors, had no idea he was speaking to someone of true industry stature. "You never asked," I replied gently. "You were too busy explaining to everyone how blue-collar inventors don't understand their intellectual property." Margaret Wheeler's pen didn't stop moving. The Raytheon client stared openly. Someone in the back chuckled. Rick's slide about strategic approaches for working with blue-collar inventors still glowed behind him. The irony was palpable. "Mr. Miller," Margaret said, leaning forward, "would you be willing to stay after this meeting? We'd like to discuss potential opportunities." Rick slumped in his chair. His credibility was in ruins. His presentation, meant to showcase his understanding of innovation, now highlighted how little he truly knew, and everyone in that room understood it. But this was only the beginning. A buzz from my phone interrupted the tension. Dr. Patricia Brown, Boeing's chief engineer, had texted, "Frank, saw Rick's presentation online. Boeing team at the Marriott. Can we stop by?" I looked at Rick, who was still staring at his failed PowerPoint like a ghost. "I think there are some people you should meet," I said calmly.
20 minutes later, the quiet murmur of the hotel lobby shifted to a tense anticipation. Rick still sat in the empty conference room, staring at his failed slides like they had personally betrayed him. I leaned back, observing him. "Dad," he muttered, "I can't believe this is happening." I said nothing. There was no need. The sound of confident footsteps approached. Dr. Patricia Brown arrived first, followed by 3 other figures who immediately commanded the space around them. You could tell by their posture, the subtle authority in their walk, that they weren't just visitors. They were power players in aerospace. Patricia's eyes met mine. "Frank," she said, smiling warmly, "good to see you. We heard through the grapevine that you were in town." Rick's eyes widened. He hadn't met her before, though we'd worked together for years. Patricia Brown was Boeing's chief engineer for commercial aircraft systems, overseeing billion-dollar projects with precision and foresight. Behind her came James Carter, vice president of innovation, Lisa Rodriguez, director of patent strategy, and Michael Davis, head of supplier relations. Each one of them had the kind of presence that silenced casual chatter. Rick instinctively straightened his back, but it was too late. His presentation, his supposed industry insight, had already been exposed as naive. Patricia extended her hand. "And this must be Rick?" Rick shook it weakly. "Yes, ma'am." His usual confident tone had vanished, replaced by a thin layer of panic. I leaned back, observing him. I gestured for the group to join us at the table. "Good timing," I said casually. "I was just having a conversation with my son about intellectual property value." Rick's expression shifted from shock to horror. He hadn't even begun to process what was about to happen. James leaned forward. "Frank, we wanted to show you something. Legal just finished reviewing your patent portfolio for our upcoming congressional testimony on innovation policy." Rick's voice cracked. "Congressional?" Lisa explained, her voice steady. "We're presenting your work as a case study in successful inventor-company partnerships. Your patents demonstrate the real-world economic impact of innovation and licensing." Margaret Wheeler, who had been watching silently from the back of the room, stopped mid-sentence with her pen hovering over her notebook. The others in the Strategic Solutions group had gathered closer, drawn by the realization that something extraordinary was unfolding. Michael Davis opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder labeled Miller Patent Portfolio, 25-Year Economic Impact Assessment. He laid the documents across the table. Rick leaned in, his eyes scanning the numbers. Patent 5923891 alone had saved Boeing $47 million in fuel costs. Patent 645723 generated over $41 million in direct licensing revenue. Patent 8234156 was projected to save the aerospace industry $200 million over the next decade. Rick's jaw went slack. The numbers weren't just large, they were staggering. Margaret Wheeler scribbled notes furiously. The Strategic Solutions Group partners had slowly begun to realize that they were witnessing a rare convergence of innovation, experience, and business acumen embodied in a single individual. Me. Patricia spoke next, her tone calm but firm. "Frank, have you thought about succession planning? We've been discussing the possibility of you taking a formal advisory role with Boeing's Innovation Council." Rick's head whipped around. "Advisory role?" James Carter elaborated. "The council advises our executive team on emerging technologies and patent strategy. Your insights and experience are unmatched." Margaret Wheeler, who had been watching silently from the back of the room, finally broke her professional silence and asked aloud, "Are you saying that Mr. Miller is being recruited to Boeing's executive advisory board?" Patricia corrected her with a smile. "Not recruited. We've been asking him for 2 years. He's always declined because he prefers to enjoy retirement." Rick's face was pale, almost ghost-like. The irony of his previous lecture about undervalued blue-collar inventors wasn't lost on him now. I leaned back and observed him. "Rick, remember yesterday when you told Emma that your father never built anything significant?" He didn't respond. Patricia continued, "Frank, your patents have not only saved millions, but shaped industry standards. If you're willing, your expertise could guide the next generation of engineers and innovators." Rick's world was unraveling. His Harvard MBA credentials had convinced him he understood industry value, but now he realized he hadn't begun to comprehend the depth of real-world innovation. Margaret Wheeler, still scribbling notes, finally looked up. This changes everything." The room fell into a silence that was both tense and electric. Every executive, every observer was aware that Rick's carefully constructed narrative had been dismantled by reality itself. And in that moment, the rules of the game had shifted completely. Rick, finally finding his voice, whispered, "Dad, how did you know this would happen?" I smiled faintly. 2 years of planning, a mother who knew exactly what you needed to learn, and a lesson that couldn't be taught in a classroom. Rick's hands trembled slightly, but for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of humility and curiosity, the first step toward real understanding. The next morning, Rick showed up at my workshop at 6 a.m. sharp. Gone was the crisp Harvard suit. In its place were worn jeans, a stained polo, and hands already rough from a month of trial sessions. The look on his face said it all, equal parts apprehension and determination. "Ready to get your hands dirty, buddy?" I asked, gesturing toward the workbenches lined with partially disassembled bearings, turbine models, and hydraulic components. He nodded silently. No bravado, no excuses, just focus. We started with basics, bearing assemblies. Not just how to assemble them, but why each component mattered, how tolerances affected efficiency, and how a single misaligned part could cost millions in operational expenses. Rick fumbled at first, fumbling wrenches, misaligning components, and dropping tiny bearings onto the concrete floor. "Careful," I said. "These aren't just parts, they're years of experience built into a machine. Treat them with respect." Over the next several weeks, the lessons escalated. I introduced him to turbine efficiency studies, engineering reports, and the intricacies of intellectual property law. He wasn't just reading textbooks, he was analyzing my patent files, understanding licensing agreements, and learning how to evaluate the real-world impact of innovation. Patricia Brown began visiting weekly, asking detailed questions about specific processes. "Rick," she asked one morning, Why would a micro adjustment in a bearing system reduce fuel consumption by 1.8% over a 500-hour flight cycle? Rick paused. He thought. He measured tolerances, recalculated load distribution, and finally answered, because the reduced friction decreases rotational energy loss and maintains optimal turbine alignment longer, improving efficiency. I raised an eyebrow. Not bad. That's the kind of thinking that separates someone who memorizes equations from someone who understands machines. Even Mike Anderson, my old union representative, grew cautiously optimistic. Frank, the kid's hands are getting rough, but his brain, that's a tougher problem, he said one afternoon. But he's asking the right questions about labor, about who's making the tech, not just how it works. Rick began to read trade journals, patent filings, and technical manuals with genuine curiosity. He attended local factory visits, observed machinists, and even started taking notes on worker innovation, small improvements that often went unnoticed, but saved time, money, and effort. One morning, as we were inspecting a hydraulic assembly, Rick spoke for the first time with what I could call insight rather than regurgitation. "Dad," he said slowly, "how did you know which problems were worth solving?" I looked at him and smiled. "Experience, son. 34 years of watching machines fail, figuring out why, and figuring out how to fix them. You can't learn this from a textbook. You have to live it, feel it, make mistakes, and learn from them." By the third month, the transformation was visible. Rick's hands were calloused, his dress shirts permanently stained, and his confidence had shifted. No longer the polished Harvard MBA who talked about strategy and undervalued inventors. He was someone beginning to earn his understanding, someone who could bridge theory with real-world application. One evening, wiping down a bearing assembly together, he said quietly, "I think I'm starting to get it." "Get what?" I asked. "Why Mom designed this test. I thought success was about rising above my origins, but it's not. It's about understanding the foundation I was built on. It's about respecting the people, the work, and the knowledge that came before me." I nodded. Exactly. And that understanding is what makes a person ready for real responsibility. Margaret Wheeler and the Strategic Solutions Group had faded into the background during this time, but word of Rick's progress had begun circulating. Patricia continued her oversight, observing his development, while Mike Anderson monitored his grasp of labor history and working-class innovation. Each week I saw him grow, not just in technical skill, but in character and perspective. By the end of 3 months, he wasn't just learning, he was thinking differently. His questions evolved from, "How do I do this?" to, "Why does this matter?" and "Who benefits from this innovation?" That shift from self-interest to genuine curiosity marked a milestone I'd been waiting for since the day he first made his misguided Harvard presentation. The December evaluation loomed. Rick would have to demonstrate everything he had learned, not just technical skill, but humility, understanding, and respect for the real value of work. And as I watched him pack up his tools that evening, I felt a rare satisfaction. He was no longer my son who thought he knew it all. He was a student ready to truly earn his education, the kind that couldn't be bought with tuition, grades, or titles.
December arrived faster than any of us expected. The evaluation board convened on a brisk Tuesday afternoon at Janet Wilson's law firm. The conference room buzzed quietly with anticipation. Patricia Brown flew in from Seattle, Mike Anderson had taken time off from the Union Hall, and Janet herself presided over the proceedings. Rick arrived 30 minutes early. No suit, no tie, just workshop clothes and hands that told a story. Calloused palms, permanently stained fingertips, the evidence of 3 months of hard, honest labor. "Let's begin," Janet said, her voice calm but commanding. "Rick, we're here to assess not just your technical understanding, but your respect for the knowledge that created your inheritance. We'll start with technical comprehension."
Patricia launched into her questions. Explain how bearing tolerances affect turbine efficiency and the associated cost savings over an operational life cycle. Rick paused, measured his words, and spoke with a clarity that surprised even me. If tolerances are too loose, components misalign, creating friction and heat, which reduces efficiency and increases maintenance costs. Tight tolerances ensure longevity and optimal energy transfer. Correct alignment reduces fuel consumption and saves millions in operational expenses. Patricia nodded approvingly. Good. Now, explain how your licensing agreements protect both the inventor and the manufacturer. Rick replied confidently, referencing the agreements we had reviewed over the past months. Licenses allow the inventor to retain control over the application of their innovation, while providing clear terms for royalty payments and usage rights, ensuring mutual benefit and encouraging further innovation. Mike Anderson leaned forward, testing a different angle. Rick, what have you learned about the role of labor and hands-on experience in driving innovation? Rick's voice softened, but there was conviction. Innovation doesn't only come from classrooms or spreadsheets. Skilled workers notice problems, create solutions, and optimize processes through experience. Respecting their knowledge is essential, not just morally, but for real-world efficiency and growth. Janet's eyes gleamed. And character. Have you learned to respect knowledge, responsibility, and community alongside technical skill? Rick took a deep breath. Yes, I understand that wealth and opportunity come with responsibility. I can't ignore the people whose work built the foundation for my success. I also understand that my education is ongoing. I have to keep learning from those with real experience. There was a long pause. Then Janet smiled. Congratulations, Rick. You've passed unanimously. Relief washed over him, but something else, a sense of accomplishment far deeper than he had ever experienced at Harvard. Later that evening, we sat in my workshop, surrounded by bearings, turbines, and blueprints. The house, the patent portfolio, and the foundation were now his to inherit. But something had shifted in him. Dad, I need to tell you something. I looked up from my workbench. What's that? I don't want the money, not yet. I want to earn my own patents first. I want to learn how to create value before I inherit it. Will you keep mentoring me? A proud smile spread across my face. Rick, I'd be honored. 6 months later, he filed his first patent application, a small improvement to hydraulic systems developed during our workshop sessions. Nothing revolutionary, but entirely his own. Meanwhile, the Frank Miller Foundation for Blue-Collar Innovation had expanded, now providing education and legal support to over 200 working-class inventors nationwide. Rick managed daily operations, while I focused on technical mentoring. It was a different kind of legacy, one built not just on wealth or connections, but on real knowledge, respect, and the value of learning by doing. And as I watched Rick teach a young inventor how to optimize a turbine assembly, I realized some lessons could only be learned the hard way. But once learned, they stayed for a lifetime. I glanced at him and asked with a smile, "So, what's the first lesson you've learned about innovation?" Rick looked up from his work, his hands covered in grease and his eyes alight with genuine curiosity. That wisdom doesn't always come with a diploma. Sometimes it comes from the people who've spent a lifetime creating value from nothing. And now I want to learn from them. I nodded, satisfied. Some education can't be bought. It must be earned.